So I keep leaving the garage. Well, I don't really keep leaving it open, but I leave it open occasionally and it's bad, right? So I leave the house and the garage door is just not shut when it's supposed to be. And sometimes I go away for a few hours or a day. And then like all my stuff's hanging out in the garage or the animals get in there and eat the dog food. It's always bad. So I would like to remedy the fact that I leave the garage door open, right? And kind of like some people use Kanban for personal projects or time management, I'm going to use failure mode to figure out what are my different options, kind of in an organized fashion. Otherwise, I could just like brainstorm it, but let's take a little discipline to the process, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the standard failure analysis method here. We're going to define the system. We're going to throw down a list of all the possible failures. So we're going to define all the components in the system, including me. And then we're going to throw down the possible failures on each of those components that would result in different type of failure and having the garage door go up and down. And again, this one's a little different just because it's my fault. So the question is, how are we going to work around Joe? And then we're going to estimate the risk of each of the failures. In this case, because we're only looking at one failure type, which would be leaving the door up, and that's pretty severe. Really what we're going to be looking at is what's the likelihood of a particular problem happening, and we're going to remediate these, figure out how to know when they occur and remediate them in sorted order, where we're going to do likelihood first, the highest likelihood first, right? So then we're going to identify how we're going to know the door is up. That's a little bit of a different problem, but it may be that it's some other maybe whatever. We're going to identify the different automatic or manual detection methods, and I actually we came up with a couple here. And then we're going to identify possible remediation paths. How can we make sure it never happens? How can we recover from it automatically? How can we recover it from it in manual fashion? So just to be honest, right now, if I leave the door open, I call home and I hope somebody's home, and then I'm like, did I leave the garage door open, right? And so that is a detection method. Somebody in the house goes and looks in the garage, and then that's manually remediated because I call them and ask them to hit the button, right? So let's talk about this, and there's going to be, I'm going to take a little break in the middle, pretend, and then you can go do this exercise partially by yourself. So we're going to get first thing is figure out what the system is, and that tells us what all the parts that could fail, right? So from left to right, there's the humans, my spouse and I. In this case, it's usually me that's the problem, but let's work this as an exercise, right? And then I got my garage door, I got the on-wall opener, I got the in-car opener, I've got the lift unit itself that makes the door go up and down. I got the garage door itself. I actually have one garage door that hangs. You can't close it automatically because nothing can push it down because it hangs. So the garage door itself. I got wiring. Have this happened before? Dog chewed on the wiring and killed something, or somebody put a pickaxe through it by accident, putting the pickaxe away. And then I have this impediment sensor that, if you're blocked, and actually if that thing goes bad and it thinks the door's blocked, you can never shut the door, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a list of failures for one or more failures for each component. The wording on that's not very good. What you do is we make a list of all the components. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we've got the operator, the remote button, the wiring, the lift, and the sensors. And what we need to do is throw down a list of all the possible failures. Like the first one might be the operator just plain forgot, right? Or the operator pressed the wrong button on the remote. I got 3 buttons on my remote and only one of them shuts the door. So I don't know why they're all there, but sometimes I hit the wrong one, right? So what I want you to do is stop the video, take about 10 minutes, identify all the failure types you can think of in this garage system for the components that we've identified, right? So I'm going to pretend I'm stopping here, but I really won't. Please take 10 minutes. Pause the video. Work on the problem. Okay, so I hope you took your 10 minutes and that worked out. So what everybody should have done, and again, you can have one or more failures for each, like, I came up with a couple of them, right? So sometimes the operator just forgets to push the button. The likelihood of that's pretty high because it's me. Or the operator presses the button but doesn't make sure it goes down, right? I've done that too, where I push the wrong button and I just drive away thinking I got it, right? On the button itself, I got one in the car and that one's got a battery in it, and I had that go bad and just drove off with the battery being dead, and that was bad. You can have a wiring problem. You could have a lift problem. I actually have a lift that won't lift the door anymore, so it doesn't matter how often you push it to go up or down, it just stops wherever it is. And you can have that sensor block thing sometimes, So what did you come up with? Did you come up with, assuming you pretended to do the exercise, we had our 5 different components in the diagram, and each of those could have one or more failure types. So you should have been able to come up with 10 anyway, different failure modes. Power's out, whatever, fuse is blown, breaker got thrown because it's plugged in where the microwave is, whatever it is, right? So this is, right now I'm going to call this the table of doom, right? We just made up a bunch of failures, and then we tried to figure out how severe the failure would be, and what the likelihood of this is. Now, I'm sensor blocked. I probably should have made that a medium, Okay, so we now we say, so I did that other list, right? And you can see didn't check the state and forgot to push the button. So in my mind, maybe not checking the door, is that a failure or was that a detection step, right? To know whether, so I pushed the button or I didn't, and then I need to know whether the door went up or down. I actually could say that didn't check state, that checking the state, a current state of the door, is it up or down? That's actually a detection problem. So I think I'm probably going to, and then you'll do this. You'll create all kinds of failures and you're like, is that remediation? Is that a detection? But in this case, we're going to say that I forgot to push the button. So then the question is, what are all the different ways I could detect that I didn't push the button, right? I can drive back, we'll have more of these on the next slide, but I just, what did you come up with? Or what would you come up with for detecting that the door wasn't down, right? So one of them is I can return back and check the door. I can have somebody else check the door. I can send somebody at the house a text message, right? Have them go do that. I could remotely check. I actually did this at our house. I put a camera in the garage so I could see if the doors, but we'll cover that in a minute. Or the system could check it itself, right? I could have, we'll talk about it in a minute, but the door might check its own status and report it somewhere, or it might, let's go on. But let's look at them, right? So it turns out the detections for this problem, and you can do this for software too, right? There's active, what I would call active detection. I used to call it a priori, but it's not. That doesn't make sense. Or it's after the fact, right? So the system could check its own state and recognize that the door's up, right? Like, hey, the door has been up for more than an hour, and I always and I do something. I recognize that as a door. Another one is we could do phone geofencing. I don't really know if the door went down, but I know that if you're not there, I'm going to try and make it go down, right? That might be, the remediation would be automatic closing the door, but the detection might be some kind of phone geofencing and be like, hey, you drove away, because sometimes I'll drive away with the door up and I forgot, right? So at least the phone, if I leave the house and the phone tells me, hey, you left the house, did you check the door? It's not foolproof, but it means I might go check the camera or do some other thing, right? So those were kind of active, like in the moment when something's happening. But then we have after the fact, I can, detection. I can go back and check if the door's up or down. I can get somebody else to do it. In my case, I actually added a garage camera so I can, on Wi-Fi, to go look at the garage and see if it's closed all the way. I could remotely check, and that might be like an app that's hooked to the garage door and it knows the current state. The geofencing might be after the fact, right? Like the geofencing might tell me immediately, or we could wait a while and then it, it says, hey, this, whatever. And then another after the fact would be, I could get an alert, right? If after it would know that the door is open, which is really system self-check state above. Or maybe we, just if it's open for a certain amount of time, we send some kind of alert, right? That looks like remediation, actually. That is dumb. Okay. So then we look at the remediation options for this garage door. And again, you can do this with any kind of problem. I can add a door state detector and then have an app. I could, that would be a way to remediate it and have it close, right? I could add Wi-Fi and IoT and create some kind of recipe that, based on geofencing, combine these together and have somehow the door itself would know that it's up for some amount of time, or it would know that nobody is near the garage anymore and it's time to close it. And then the remediation on the manual side would be call my spouse or neighbor, which we actually did call the neighbor the other day. And another one would be to add some Wi-Fi and phone app that would close the door so I could use the camera that I put in the garage to see if it's up, and then I could use the button, remote button call on the phone app. And so those would be different ways that I could do active in flight and after the fact detection, and I could do automated and manual remediation. So, in my case for this, you got to decide on what detection you're going to use and what remediation approach you're going to use. So in my case, on the detection side, I picked at a garage camera, and I decided that I was going to remotely check it using the camera, right? So I detect it by looking through the camera lens and seeing whether the door is open or not. And then in my case, we didn't want to put any more hardware in the garage after the camera because I had a spare one anyway. Who doesn't? And so I called my spouse. So in my case, the detection was actually 2 parts, and it's after the fact. I add a garage camera and I remotely check the state of the door through the camera. And then I call my spouse if it turns out, that the door's up, right? So that's what I did. You could mix and match these differently. As I kind of like the geofencing. I could set it up where I geofence and then send an alert remindingly to check. See, right now I still have to remember to check the camera, right? So I could notify myself. So you could mix and match these on the detection side and mix and match them on the remediation side. So, I did this for a bunch of them, right? So here I've got one failure on each of the components. I rated them low, medium, and high in likelihood, came up with some detection. The wiring one to detect is really hard. I actually might have to do some crazy troubleshooting. And then I came up with remediation steps for all of those. So if you actually had worked the exercise, you would have done the same thing, right? When we do failure modes, what we want to do is we figure out all the components. We identify the possible failures in each one. There's always more than one. We look at the risk factor created by the severity and the likelihood, and then we figure out how we would detect it and what our remediation options were, and we select, based on cost and value, which detection model we're going to use and which remediation. So basically what you do is you attack the highest risk first. In my case, the real risk was just leaving the door up, and I'm assuming somebody will be around to close it, so I put a camera in, as I said, and we just go and look at the dang door and see if it's up remotely as if I were there, and I either go back or I call somebody. So our goal is to attack the highest risk first and use auto detection and automated remediation if possible. And that's it. I hope you now have a plan for keeping your garage door shut. Have a great day.